So good afternoon. Thank you first off for everybody staying for the last session of the day. I want to just take this second to set up the panel. We're going to have multiple companies here with us today from different sectors within the defense industry. And what we would like to use this opportunity for is to give you an idea of how industry can be a partner with the military and other parts of the United States government in achieving exactly what the CNO was talking about. He was talking about being ready, being capable, being lethal, and the way that you get there is with your partner from the defense industry. So as they're all here now, I will get rid of this mic and hopefully they'll turn on the other one. Okay, all right, great, you can hear me. So I'd just like to take a second and introduce the panel to you. I know you can read their bios, but I just want you to know which one is which. So immediately to my left, I have Beth Goode, and because I haven't memorized your bio. So Beth is the Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Capewell. They are a global leader in engineering, aviation, and support solutions. So welcome, Beth. We have Jillair Kubish, and she is the Executive Vice President of Global Military and Law Enforcement Business Operations at Colt. Welcome, Jillair. And last but not least, we have McMillian. He is Vice President of Sustainment Operations for Pratt & Whitney Military Engines. Thank you for being with us here today, Andre. So you heard my setup really quickly, and I'm going to use this opportunity to ask them a couple of questions to whet your palate, and then hopefully we will have the audience chime in and really see if we can stump this group. So, okay, so first off, as you all know, we talked about what industry brings to help us have not a hollow force, to have an actual force. We know that over the past few years, we have had a range of issues going on in the world, hence the age of instability. We've looked at things like COVID, we have climate change, we have unrest in different areas of the world. A lot of conversations so far today about Ukraine. We've talked about the Far East, and there are multiple other areas of potential conflict. So what I would appreciate if each of you could just take a minute and talk about how your company or you within your company is addressing one or two of these issues, maybe pre and post pandemic, we could start with that, and how it impacts you and your ability to support the American people and the United States military. So how about I start at the far end with Andre, and we'll work our way back towards me.
Okay. Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. And to your point, Bill, the last few years have certainly been challenging for everyone. In many ways has been the great equalizer, because every continent, every country, every company has been affected, and we've been affected directly with supply chain shortages, both from a raw material perspective, as well as what I would say the human capital in terms of people being able to work. Our people that are machinists, a lot of our inspectors, especially impacting how we build and design engines. So a couple things that we've been able to do over the last few years is really just get closer to the supply base. We have actually, we've worked with all our suppliers to look at procurement strategies where they've had struggles in being able to have actually buying power. We've helped them in terms of being able to buy raw material that's needed. If you think about our industry, there's about 9 countries that can make nuclear weapons. There's about 4 that can actually build jet engines, and really there's about 1 that can actually provide the lethality and the survivability that is required for the United States. And so when we sit in that space, it's very constrained. And so we've embedded people with our suppliers. We've actually ensured that they were there to make sure that we had business continuity. And then we've also worked with them in terms of other procurement strategies, as well as different payment terms. And so we've been able to get very, very close in the last couple of years, and I think we've learned a lot as a result of doing so, and it's changed how we think about and how we want to operate in the future.
Great. Thank you, Andre. Jillair?
Yeah, so I see a lot of uniforms out there. I'm assuming you're familiar with the M4 and the M16, so I don't need to tell you who Colt is. But let me give you a little background on the defense market that's Colt. And I think a lot of people immediately, I guess it depends on the audience, right? But some immediately go to the single action army and to the Python and the snake guns and the commercial piece of Colt. But actually there's quite a big defense section of Colt still. And in fact, we're in multiple markets, so direct international sales, we sell into 100 different countries. So these are MODs, MOIs around the world. We have both the M4, M4A1, and the M16 FMS contracts that we're selling through the Army into, again, global militaries around the world. We've got direct Army business as well, so any bolt that you're having replaced right now, that's definitely coming out of West Hartford right now, or Hartford right now. And then the law enforcement market, so your three-letter agencies and your police departments around the country. So those are really kind of our public safety kind of defense markets that we're currently in. And as Andre mentioned, we've seen significant kind of, in our situation, it's a pendulum swing, right? So COVID hits and we can't travel, so that's very difficult from a business and sales perspective. Can't get in front of the customer, can't do those fun product demonstrations. A lot of countries were closed to business, outside of their own country. So that impacted business for sure. And given direct commercial sales have this very lengthy export licensing process, it really kind of put us back by several months on that side. In addition to that, we've seen defense budgets around the world kind of frozen a bit, right? So when COVID hit and healthcare became all the more important, vaccinations needed to be purchased, defense spending kind of trickled in a little bit and slowed down. So that was definitely an effect that we felt. Supply chain, I think we can all probably talk about the disruptions that we've seen in supply chain because of COVID and what's going on in the conflicts around the world right now. So that was also, something that was really impactful to us. Not so much, Colt's made in the U.S., so not so much, from importing as we then had to kind of compete with a lot of our local vendors and suppliers who had to help those that were importing. So we definitely saw some supply chain disruptions. But if you swing that pendulum the other way, it's tough to say, but these conflicts around the world are good for a defense business, right? So for us, we've seen the opposite effect. So we've seen defense budgets opening back up. We've seen a lot of countries kind of take an internal look, right? So I think immediately folks wanted to see, how do they help, countries like Ukraine, and in fact, Colt was really proud to be able to donate several rifles over to Ukraine, and still am supplying to Ukraine soldiers. But a lot of people were looking at, okay, how do I help? What do I have to offer the conflict and to keep the peace? But also, geez, what does that mean? What vulnerabilities am I seeing in my own small arms fleet in my situation? So what we're seeing increases in defense budgets for things like direct sales to the militaries of these countries. Again, it's not a European thing. It really is worldwide. We're seeing definitely an increase in procurement, in upgrading, in modernizing, right? All the things that we do in our fleets, they're doing around the world. And one of the things that I'm seeing a significant increase in is this need for independence. So, and specifically defense capability independence. So we're, unlike Pratt and Whitney, a lot of people make rifles around the world, but not make high quality rifles like the US does. And so we're looking at a lot of countries, whether it's through this kind of understanding their capabilities or looking at what their needs are, on top of the supply chain disruptions that they've also experienced. We're seeing this need and this want to be a little bit more independent internally within these countries. So what kind of ties to that is the ability to come to the US and say, hey, are you willing to kind of share some of your technical data, some of your technical knowledge, some of your manufacturing know-how? Are you interested and willing in setting up any kind of manufacturing in country, teaming with some of these industries and manufacturers in other countries to, again, support their militaries and law enforcement? So that's definitely on the rise. And in fact, a lot of the international defense procurement processes are competitive, right? And so that's becoming a condition to say, hey, we want everybody, this is what we're looking for. This is our technical specification. But we also want the ability to maybe produce a percentage of this in country. And so right now, back in the day, that was not that common. Right now, it's almost a condition of it to, again, give them some of that independence. So as you can see, COVID really slowed us down, and now we've swung the other way, and it's busy. We're busy, which, again, from a business perspective is great.
Beth.
Excellent. So thank you guys so much for having me here today. I'm coming from Capewell. We have a long-standing history here in the Hartford area. We've been around for over 140 years. So that's excellent for us to be here that long, but it certainly means that this extreme change in business through COVID has been challenging. Seeing different conflicts around the world has also been challenging. I know we talked a little bit about human capital, but we're manufacturing. You have to be in person for that job. And right now, there's a huge change in just the way people are thinking about the workforce. I think COVID really had everyone understanding they'd like to be working from home. They want to be able to work early in the morning, late at night, maybe not those middle times of the day. And manufacturing doesn't necessarily lend itself to that. So we're really facing challenges of retaining our workforce. We never shut down during COVID, so we did keep production going, but figuring out how do you do it safely? How do you make sure your people are able to come to work and not be worried about being sick? So we've really faced some challenges, but we've done a great job of learning how to be innovative and offer flexible work schedules, maybe not from a timing perspective, but shorter work weeks. We've also experienced some of the same supply chain issues that I think everyone on this panel has. Because we have a legacy business, we have a lot of familial relationships with our suppliers, meaning they're mom and pop shops. We've been buying from them forever, and they're these really niche, unique products that we can't just get from anywhere else. Well, during COVID, they shut down. They were ready to retire. It was a great time. And all of a sudden, we can't get what we need. So really going out and figuring out where is our second source of supply, how do we get what we need from a raw materials perspective. On the second prong of supply chain issues is the cost. The cost went up pretty substantially on a lot of things, like just raw materials, raw metals are going up. The cost to run our plants are going up. So from a supply chain perspective, we've certainly faced a lot of challenges. We're overcoming them. We're working through getting to know new partners. I know you mentioned kind of sitting with your suppliers and really talking, how do we make sure that we're controlling the cost to our end customer, but getting what we need? We've also kind of finally seen that change in buying behavior. So there was a pretty slow period where no one was really buying anything. Money was being focused elsewhere. And then all of a sudden with conflict, we're replenishing stock. Budgets are opening back up. And so you've got this challenge where you don't have the materials that you necessarily need. You don't necessarily have the workforce that you need, but you've got customers saying, wow, I really, really need those products. And so I think Capewell's just done a fantastic job of reaching out to our partners, some of our competimates, so companies that we would see as competitors. They're in the same space as us, but we're all working towards a common goal. So we have a pretty specific project. We provide a lot of parachute and aerial delivery supplies, and our Army customer is really replenishing their stock on that. And there's a couple companies, we each make a few small parts to the kit, but the kit has to be sold as a whole. We're coming together and collaborating and saying, hey, you know what, Capewell, we have the manufacturing space and the workforce, and company A, you don't necessarily have exactly what you need. How can we all work together and then go share that with our end customer so that as an industry, we're still meeting everything that they need?
So great, thank you, Beth. So as as I've been listening to your responses, and I've been thinking back on my own experience as an acquirer, wearing my government hat, and I did a lot of foreign military sales work as well. And we have the instances that we see now in Ukraine and other parts of the world. One of the ways to quickly get things to potential foreign partners as allies is to take things from existing U.S. military stock. So I know, Jillair, you mentioned that, Beth, you mentioned that, and I'm sure, Andre, you're having the same sorts of issues there with engines. Are there things that you see on the government side, or potentially within your own control, that could help you address those sorts of issues to meet the timeliness of demand that you're getting from international agencies or allies of the United States? I'll throw that open to the panel. Anybody?
Yeah, so that's funny that you mentioned that, because we actually just received an order to replenish what the U.S. has recently sent out, about 10,000 rifles that have recently been acquired from through the SDAF fund. So very familiar with that process. But it's an interesting dynamic, if I'm a foreign country and I want to buy U.S.-made product, and Colt specifically, because there is that balance. The FMS process, believe it or not, it's got a lot of benefits, but one of them is not necessarily speed.
Oh, no, it is not.
But then if you go to the other side of that, the direct sale, you've got this very lengthy export licensing process through the State Department and over to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So, that's tricky for them to kind of, and if all things are essentially the same, comparatively speaking, it really is on us to try and kind of say, well, here are your pros and cons, and if it was really speed, this is what we recommend. I will say we've definitely seen changes there in this new administration in terms of export licensing delays. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with that export process, but the license itself, kind of on a good day and under prior administrations, it would take 4 to 6 months, sometimes 6 to 9 months. It's now easily over a year to get rid of product. So that's tricky for us as a manufacturer. And it's very difficult competitively speaking, right? Because these global militaries can go to many other countries and get product. Now it's not a Colt, so it's not as good, but they can get it much quicker. And so I'm at a disadvantage, for those direct global military sales, because again, I can start your process. You're going to find countries that are going to be able to beat me on price. They're going to be able to turn it around in weeks, not months or years. So it does cause some risks for us. Certainly as we go to sell. In that situation, again, that's where FMS does start to look more appealing to folks. The good news for me is because I have the FMS contract, both of those channels come back to me, so I'm happy for the sale either way. But there really are pros and cons, to both. Again, to me, right, you're not going to beat my quality, and so I think that's worth waiting for. But if you need something right now, that's tricky. That's tricky from a U.S. perspective.
Yeah, so the last speaker, Admiral Gilday, talked a lot about readiness, and so from a readiness perspective, we've done some unique things because we were not able to get the responsiveness that was required within our own government. So one example would be we typically contract on an annualized basis, so year after year, and from a supply chain perspective, that doesn't provide you the level of stability that you need to send the right demand signal into a supply base that's pretty constrained. So in many cases, we've actually gone out on our own dime to be able to procure long lead hardware in advance, and sometimes without a contract, for the benefit of obviously the 3 services that we support, primarily on a Joint Strike Fighter, as well as all of our international partners. So that's just kind of one in terms of material availability. The second would be, as he was talking about readiness in Asia Pacific, we've actually stood up maintenance and repair and overhaul capability in Australia, where we will open up doors on Japan next June. And we've opened doors in Norway and Netherlands. So that partnership in terms of building partner capacity has been significant. We're providing commercial best practices. We're using terminology like, hey, this is our partner. They're not a supplier to us, but they're truly a partner in terms of how we actually do business, because we view it through a readiness lens. And I think when you think about that, that's not anything that's dictated in a contract line item, but it's just the way that we've approached the world of readiness that we're all a part of.
Great, thank you, Andre.
I would echo, I think we have very similar supply chain issues. So we are certainly investing in long lead time materials that we know we're going to need. We don't necessarily have the contract in place, but we know that the warfighter is going to eventually need those products. So really taking a deep dive look and saying, where can we take the financial risk, but be sure that we're ready to provide when the orders come in. I think at a high level, everyone talks about supply chain issues, but on the ground level, it can really mean a big deal. There are certain supplies that take us 6 months, 8 months to get in. So really going ahead and saying, we think in a year we are going to need those things, and bringing those in-house. A lot of what we do, they're sewn goods, they're the harnesses, they're the bags that hold the parachutes together. We make the releases that are made out of metal that go onto the warfighter. So they're truly survivability pieces that save lives. So we work really hard to make sure that we've got the supplies that we need, that we've got the workforce in place. When we're forward projecting what we think is going to be bought, we'll go ahead and start making those pieces so that they're in-house, in stock. The moment the order comes in, we can turn around and ship it very quickly, because these are items that we simply can't not have for our warfighter. So definitely echo the idea of being able to get the long lead items and then also produce in anticipation of large orders.
So I'd like to just kind of pile on and help draw a connection directly back to the individuals in the room about what our panelists are talking about. So many of the folks in the room here are warfighters. You're wearing the uniform, or you recently wore the uniform. And what they're talking about at this point, the difficulty of getting supplies, of getting things through, delivering on the schedule, that you are out there as providing that demand signal. If they can't do that, when you go into the field, you will not have the kind of equipment that you expect you should have when you go into your operation. So the kinds of things that may seem somewhat basic here have a direct impact on you personally as you go down the line and you're in the field and you're doing what you need to do. So with that as a transition point, let me open it up to the audience and see if we have any questions right away. I think we have one. There's one back here, and there's one back there, and I have one right in front. Okay.
Hi. So you were talking a little.
I'm sorry. Could you identify who you are? And
I'm Brendan. I'm a junior studying economics and finance at the University of Connecticut.
Great.
So I had a question in terms of supply chains. I understand a lot of you are made in America, but at the same time, we've seen these like electricity rationing. We've seen insecurity in water supplies, things like that. All of those can impact substantially the manufacturing process. So I was wondering, what steps are your companies take to sort of diversify your manufacturing process across the United States to ensure that those sorts of natural weather disasters, in the face of those, the U.S. military can still be well equipped and well supplied for a conflict?
Well, I'll say it's not optional, because it's a term of the contract with the military. You've got to be able to perform no matter what, as challenging as it is, and I fully appreciate that. You sign up for that when you're a defense contractor, and they are number one, right? So it doesn't matter how much commercial business you have or what you do globally. If the U.S. military, if you've got a contract and they need your product, that comes before anything else you manufacture, which, again, we're certainly proud to do. But there's a lot of things that we have to do, because you're absolutely right. The cost of all of these things is increasing, right? And so our overhead is increasing, and it's causing, financial challenges, directly tied to the supply chain. The best that you can do is continue to negotiate with suppliers, continue to look for ways internal that you can bring your costs down. Second source, third source, having, repetitive kind of supplier sources is really important so that if somebody does fall into one of those challenges, again, you've got a really healthy supply chain. So it's kind of preparing the best that you can. And there's, at the end of the day, it's really just having a really strong communication with your suppliers and, kind of keeping in touch so that nothing is surprising.
I would tag on a little bit to that as well. I mentioned Capewell is small. We have 2 manufacturing sites, and we can't exactly just transfer what we're manufacturing at one site to the next site. I mean, just the sheer amount of equipment it takes, it's not like I can drive it from one site to the next and say, okay, we're going to start setting up here. So I think when we talk about second sources of supply, that's great, but we are also balancing, it wouldn't be feasible for Capewell to have multiple different manufacturing facilities across the nation to protect against a potential natural disaster in Connecticut, but then we can manufacture somewhere else. We certainly do have partners we can lean on. I mentioned that we're working with some of our partners now to figure out how to leverage different sites and different capabilities to meet the warfighters' needs, and that's certainly always top of mind. But there are other priorities the military has too, which is having small businesses be involved, giving opportunities to those that are really trying to build the foundation and not sending everything to, no offense, the very, very large corporations who do have that capability. So I think from a small business perspective, we work really hard with our partners to make sure we do have some redundant capabilities, but it would be impossible to state that we could fully comprehend or protect against some sort of natural disaster, at which point we do work with our end user customer. We have great communication with them. I know you mentioned increasing cost. That's across the board. It's the labor because everyone is demanding more. It's the cost of doing business, so that does increase our overhead. I know there's a lot going around in the Pentagon about giving some relief to contractors around the pricing for that because it's been very challenging depending on the structure of our contracts. So I think open communication with our customers is extremely important as well.
Likewise, we have a group that's called Strategic Sourcing, and they've done a phenomenal job in terms of looking at not only where do you actually procure and can secure raw earth metals, so like the likes of titanium for a long period of time. Russia makes titanium, but we're not procuring it from there. But they easily could have been a source if you think about it in terms of being a player in a global market. But then also for finished goods, we've also ensured that there's not a single point of failure. So in many cases, it's been dual source where we can. There's a lot of effort that is done by our engineering team to look at where can we expand limits if we ever do get constrained. Are there opportunities to fly beyond the level that we've expected? This last couple of years, it really provided a reset for us because of COVID. And so we've invested in technology. It's called usage-based lifing. So and you can kind of think about it in terms of your car. In the past, you typically were on a cycle where you would refresh your oil at a specific period in time, regardless of how fast you drove it or how long you drove it. And now, based upon condition-based maintenance, your car kind of tells you that, hey, it's probably time for a service. And thankfully, if it's once a year, it's probably not that bad economically for you as well. Likewise, we've done that on engines to the point where we can identify the condition, the environment that you're flying in, and be able to predict and extend a life. And so the Air Force has been a receiver of this primarily to the tune of about $1 billion worth of savings over the cost of over the life of the F-119 program that powers the F-22, and now we're building in that same technology into the Joint Strike Fighter. So there's been opportunities to look at strategic sourcing through a different lens, and how can we actually leverage investing in technology to help the supportability.
Great, thank you. You have a couple.
Thank you. My name is Frank Senna, and I am a retired Chief Warrant Officer, Military Intelligence. After 25 years of retirement, I think I want to go back in. So this is kind of a pointed question. In the last presentation by the Chief of Naval Operations, he was asked about recruiting and retention. Thank you. And that was of great interest to me. And I see the challenges because I like demographics. And it's a very small pool that he has to choose from 24 million down to 400,000. Well, we have a 16-year-old grandson who's starting to look at colleges, and I keep him abreast of what's going on in the world because he actually enjoys it. Now, whether he joins the military services or not is an academic question. My question is, what kind of challenges do you all have recruiting students, particularly one with an engineering degree, which is like what he'd like to pursue, and getting the best and the brightest out of schools and even technical colleges into your programs? Is that clear? Okay, thank you.
I'll start it. So, it's interesting because obviously the last couple of years we've been able to learn a lot. There's people that have decided to retire just for a variety of reasons. And as we've looked at our recruiting, I look at my own workforce. I basically have roughly about 1,000 people across the globe, and many of them have just joined us within the last 5 years. And so, and then we just had one person celebrate 40 years of anniversary as well, so that we kind of have the spectrum within Pratt & Whitney. And I would tell you that we realize that we have to start looking at deeper reach talent all the way down to junior high. And so how do we actually partner at a very localized level, and not just local to Connecticut, obviously, because we're down the street, but everywhere where we actually have a presence, arguably even around the globe. So as we identify suppliers in other countries, we look at that pathway, we call it, from school all the way to being able to get a technical degree if that's required, right into employment. And so from an intern perspective, if you want to join us and become an intern, it's a good deal. We'll invest a couple years in you with the intent to hire you. And so that's, again, through a different lens. So if you're in college today, and if you're a rising junior, rising senior, we're looking with a longer intent, probably without even letting you know. But that's the plan, to be able to look at from a recruiting and retention perspective.
I'll say at Colt it's probably a little bit different than that. The small arms industry is small. And so, and we're in kind of the gun manufacturing valley of our country. And so there's a lot of kind of poaching and cross-pollination with Mossberg and Smith & Wesson and Ruger and Sig Sauer. And so we get a lot of folks that have been in this industry for a long time and bring kind of a different technical expertise to Colt specifically. That being said, we also have been very successful kind of poaching from aerospace. So, and we're happy to do that any opportunity we get because there's a lot of talent there as well. But we're absolutely understanding and, again, building the future Colt, right, takes us going deeper and us finding, that greater level of talent and at a younger age. And so that's actually something that's very exciting to me to think of, setting this company up that's been around since the 1800s for that next generation. And, Colt's been supplying militaries since like 1830s. I'm excited to see where that goes and to see the players that we bring in now and what they're going to do to put their thumbprint on kind of where it goes in the future. So it's a pretty fun challenge.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think that especially for kids coming out of college, there's so many opportunities, it's almost probably overwhelming. And I don't think it's a surprise to say that government is a little bit slower to adopt some of the more exciting incentives that the Googles and the Facebooks offer. We don't have these massively entertaining campuses that have movie rooms and chairs to go sleep in and free lunch every day. You're not going to be able to necessarily work from home 5 days a week. So those are absolutely challenges that I know we face, especially in some of those highly sought after specialties. But that being said, one of the ways that we really overcome it is I am just so proud to work where I work. Talking about what we make, the draw to know that what I do is so directly impactful to a warfighter's life, that's really the incentive when we're recruiting, and that's the message we try to get across. So, our building might be in Hartford, Connecticut, and not all the way over in Silicon Valley, and you might not have the biggest and brightest desk. We're doing our best to make it look great, but man, you just do have a completely different impact. So I think as we talk through recruiting and retention, just really understanding what the workforce is looking for, we are doing some things to make some changes, like offering a more flexible work from home policy, looking at doing 4-day work weeks or 980s, which is where you work 9 days out of 10. But also certainly making sure that there's an understanding that when you come and work in the defense space, you're doing it because you have a passion for what you're doing, not because you want that big lofty exciting, shiny object in the moment.
So, if I could just chime in, having gone through the recruiting process that you just discussed, I was identified in high school and recruited into an engineering field and went through ROTC and then was commissioned and sent for a master's degree, and that was all using the same kind of techniques that you're describing there. The thing that drove a lot of us, and I think almost everybody in uniform, is the opportunity to serve and to do something larger than yourself. So it's not always about what you're paid, but it's about what you get to do and who you get to do it with. And I think that's kind of at the heart of what you were also describing.
I'll also say we attract a lot of folks that like firearms, and so we've got, unlike your products, we get to do some pretty fun things and get to own a lot of really fun things. So
We do try to leverage the cool stuff. We drop things out of airplanes as well, so I do try to attract young engineers to say, hey, you can go work with the Army and figure out how to drop a UAV out of a plane really far, or drop some munitions over in islands that you can't get to with a truck, but definitely not quite as cool as the
we just go to the
firearms.
range,
Yeah.
like a lot.
Hi, John Barnowski. It's a very, very broad question, which may pertain more to previous speakers. But of all the cool things that you guys tell us when I attend such seminars, how much can't you tell us? I mean, just what proportion? I know you're not going to give out any secrets, but are we getting 90% of what our capabilities are, or 10%? Weaponry, aerospace, whatever it might be.
So who wants to tackle that one first?
That is a funny question. That's a good one. And we talked a little bit about kind of innovation. And as I thought of what I would say when that question came up, right, is there's not a lot we can say. But I think if you look at the common theme, certainly for small arms, right, we're constantly working with Picatinny and the PM Soldier Group to get more lethal products, right? Higher pressure ammo. We're working on, longer ranges and increased lethality. Just general themes, but we certainly can't get down to what that means, right? Because we're working directly with the Army technical teams on a lot of kind of innovative type research projects. But I would also say my technology is, right, it's like not very high tech. I'm small arm. So I'm sure that's a very different answer for Andre in terms of what he can share. But
Yeah, I think it's, for the most part, you can see everything, and it's already been public release in many, many respects. So if you think about, the Admiral was talking about having a carrier that is primarily fielded with 5th gen capability. How many of you saw Maverick? If you haven't, it's worth seeing. So when he talks about that, there's from a propulsion system perspective, the aircraft has gone through 3 upgrades already without an upgrade to the propulsion system, and so we're in discussions now and talking about, hey, we have a solution for that. It's a solution that is actually trivariant common, meaning that all 3 services would get the same benefit, as well as all of the international partners that invested in the program early on, which was really, truly the bedrock of the program. And so from that perspective, it's been in the broad open in terms of what that capability can provide, both in terms of readiness, both in terms of affordability, in terms of safety, product safety, and then effectiveness in global operations, especially anti-access aerial denial. And so I think for us, we're in a unique position as a result of that. And I think having forums like this provide us another opportunity to share that story.
Yeah, so in terms of what we can't share, I would say that probably some of the most interesting parts of our business from a research and development perspective are the things that we're not going to be able to share on this stage, but that is probably one of the coolest parts. We're a legacy business. We do machining, we do aerial delivery, and really being able to work with our allied partners to think through what does the future battlefield look like. That is part of the coolest thing about the job and about the company and what we do. But it's also the part we really don't get to talk about ever. So there's a lot we don't get to share, but it's probably the most interesting and most exciting.
So since we have like 2 minutes left, moderator's prerogative, I'm going to ask the last question. So if it were up to you, what could the government do as your partner to help you perform better and be more responsive? Anybody want to take that one on?
I have a quick answer. I would say continuing to evolve the acquisition cycle and approach, because it moves like a snail. It's big, it's slow. I know we've all kind of mentioned it, but it can take a decade from the time you think a requirement could be interesting to you actually getting a prototype. And I think this is something the military and the government is very aware of, and they're doing an awesome job of really trying to move things forward. We're pulling out OTAs, which allows more for rapid prototyping, bringing in newer technologies without the cumbersome process. Army Futures Command has been stood up, which is where it's more of a private-public relationship versus the Army coming in with requirements that industry can't meet. It's allowing for more conversations. I think first and foremost, the way that we could really work together better is just continuing to talk through and evolve the acquisition process, because it really is probably the biggest reason that it takes so long and makes it so difficult to consistently work in the government.
Great.
Yeah, immediately it was just go faster. But, you know, I would say I spent my first career with the Department of Justice, and specifically with ATF. And so I'm very used to red tape and process and all of the things that come with dealing with the government. You know, on the business side, it's the most painful for sure. And a lot of it is very much justified and understood and all of that. But it does, like I mentioned earlier, it puts us at a competitive disadvantage as we're competing globally. So if the government were to help me, it would be whether it's the FMS process or the export licensing process, to find ways to get comfortable with these transactions and have it not just take so long.
Andre.
I'd say two words: funding stability. Readiness is either enhanced by it or it's crippled by it. Two quick examples would be the fact that we're on this annualized cycle year after year to be able to contract. And if you look at our commercial side of our business, because we are a blended business, that business is typically 5 to 7 years in terms of the sweet spot relative to contracting. So I think there's examples that are right there in front of us that we can actually look at as a good model to follow.
So as an acquisition guy, I really enjoyed this, and there are a lot more questions I could ask you, but I know we're out of time. Please join me in thanking our panelists for their contribution today.